Welcome to week 9 of the head coach episode. I'm here with Yanni. How's it going, man?
What's up, buddy?
Great week of gambling for me. I may have gotten robbed by old Jaden Daniels, but we will cover that in the next episode. Let's just get into the game breakdowns for this week. And I will start first. On Thursday night, we have the Texans going into MetLife to play the reeling Jets. The Texans have an implied team total of 20.5 points, and the Jets have an implied team total of 22 points. For the Texans, we're starting Tank Dell and Joe Mixon. We are sitting Dr. Schultz, and we're tricky decisioning Stroud. And then for the Jets, we're starting Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson. And then we're tricky decisioning Aaron Rodgers, Tyler Conklin, and Devontae Adams. So let's start with the Jets first. They came off just a horrendous loss to the Patriots on Sunday. I believe they were the first team in like 10 years in the NFL to allow less than 250 yards, not throw an interception or turn the ball over and lose the game. Like usually that's an auto win if you do that as a football team. They did not do that. As it turns out, firing Robert Saleh, who was your head coach, due to expectations, has now tanked your season, and now you traded for Devontae for some reason, and Aaron just looks over the hill. That being said, though, this Texans defense and just team in general has looked a little bit weird the past couple weeks. That's why we have Rodgers, Conklin, and Devontae as tricky decisions. You could do it if you're buying in on this Texans team being a little bit off right now. The Jets are even favorites in this game, which is surprising to me. If this was a Sunday game, I would probably have a bet on this on the Texans. Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson. I feel like they're no brainers at this point. For Brees Hall, I think the dream season is dead for him. Like, make no mistake, right? And Braylon Allen is getting some work, but it's not enough to not call Brees a locked and loaded RB1. And then Garrett Wilson, he's continued to get targets. He hasn't looked the best with them, but he has been getting you there, or at least kind of performing more like the first round draft or second round draft pick he was going as. For the Texans, unfortunately, Stephon Diggs, my most drafted player in fantasy this year, tore his ACL. It has just been a brutal year for the wide receivers, and that's why we have CJ Stroud as a tricky decision. Here's the thing: it didn't look right even with Diggs out there when Nico Collins has not been playing. Now that Diggs is out too, it's like you went from a really strong Texans wide receiver core of Collins, Diggs, and Dell to now you just have Tank Dell, who at times this year has not looked great. We're still going to start him though because he's going to be the primary pass catcher in this offense, and we're starting Joe Mixon, who is slowly turning into one of the best fantasy picks of the year. I'm shocked every time I watch the Texans play football. He looks slow to me, but he just sees holes really well. He's a really good football player. And then this Jets defense is not what it used to be, especially now that they got rid of Robert Saleh. So fire him up. And then Dr. Schultz, it's a cute idea. I just wouldn't do it here. He hasn't been getting the volume this year. Maybe maybe if Tank Dell goes down, you'll see Dr. Schultz in like a tricky decision or start. But for now, no, thank you. Any feedback on this one?
The only thing is just the Stroud call. It's a football versus fantasy football take. It is not a take on Stroud. Stroud, I think, has been a totally competent guy no matter who's in the lineup and will probably win this game and will still lead them to wins without his guys. But for fantasy, he's taken a noticeable dip without Nico and now no Diggs, like Ted said. But no,
Yep.
it's certainly not a football take, just a fantasy take.
Yep. We were looking at this pre-show. CJ has not gone over 20 points or got to 20 points since Nico Collins went out. It's just you have to shift expectations. Still a great player, but when he's not running around like Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, those guys, you don't have that upside cap, I guess.
Okay, and what should be a barn burner? Patriots with an implied team total of 17.5, Titans with an implied team total of 21. Looks like we're getting Drake May versus Mason Rudolph this week. They haven't definitively said on either one. Drake May is somewhere in between stage 3 and 4 of the concussion protocol, but if he gets in two more limiteds by the end of the week, it looks like he's going. But still, okay, this Titans defense has been fantastic this year, especially against the pass. They always have a good defense, but they really know what they're doing, right? So Stevenson is here starting. We asked you to go trade for him weeks ago. Me and Ted both grabbed some Stevenson shares in the draft. I'm a fan of him, man. He's been up and down this week, but I think all in all, you could do a lot worse than your RB2 or your flex spot having Stevenson in there. And this is a little bit of a run funnel defense. May's been pretty good for Stevenson overall. Coming off a big week last week, I actually lost because I benched him in one league. So yeah, happily rolling Stevenson. we don't want any part of the rest of the passing game for now. We're still kind of waiting to see who's going to emerge there. I think Drake May has been a bump to the team overall, but between kind of the three weapons, it looks like Polk has successfully taken himself out of the mix. So then it's Douglas, Booty, and Henry, right? Which one of them is going to come out? I really don't know. And for now, you're not starting any of them. Drake May is a fine start in good matchups. This isn't a good matchup. And then for the Titans, Pollard. Pollard is going to be your start, locked and loaded. We know what the deal is. It looks like Spears is either requesting a trade or might be injured. There was some talk about that on Twitter today. We'll see where that goes. Pollard, been one of the best value picks of the draft, has an amazing schedule rest of season. Plug him into that RB2 spot and enjoy the outsized production for where you drafted him. Awesome pick, awesome player. Get him out there. Your sort of tricky decision for this one's going to be Ridley. Ridley, I actually drafted pretty heavy shares of Ridley. I think I took 3 Ridley shares between like pick somewhere in the mid 7th round, early 8th round, somewhere in there. I liked him if he was in that range. So he had his first kind of breakout game this year. What we thought it would look like if he was, playing the Jamar Chase role for Callahan in the system. I just don't know. Is it just one game? Is it not? Is it Mason Rudolph? What's going on there? The only thing is, I would actually say he's a full-blown start this week if it were almost any other team. Christian Gonzalez is really blank teams' X receivers, man. That guy is really, really good. And this is a low volume, low scoring game where I think both teams are going to really try to pound the ball. So proceed with caution. We only have 2 teams on buys this week. I would think for most rosters, you're going to have a better starting choice than Ridley. But if you don't, I mean, I think he's perfectly fine to put in your flex, and you'll probably get your, 8 to 10 points. If you're lucky, gets the touchdown, maybe 15 plus.
Yeah. The only two things I have on this, and it's really just to hammer home a couple of points that you already made, right? First one on the Patriots. I am maybe I'm an irrational Drake May fan, but to me he has turned this Patriots team from an unwatchable garbage offense into at least an interesting and fantasy relevant one. Us sitting him here and all of the pieces has nothing to do with Drake May the player. It just has to do with this Titans defense. And even though they gave up like 50 last week to the Lions, that'll happen sometimes. We're still calling them a very good defense, even though they traded away Ernest Jones. Then for the Titans, I think that Calvin Ridley, now that DeAndre Hopkins is gone, has positioned himself to be like an absolute target monster. I'm thinking like Deontay Johnson on the Panthers type of deal. The only like difference between Deontay and the Panthers and Ridley and the Titans is I think the Titans quarterback play is significantly worse. I don't think we're going to get there this year with Will Levis, but if Mason Rudolph can kind of play like he did near the tail end of last year when he got the Steelers into the playoffs, Ridley could be a key flex piece going down here in the stretch. So if he's on waivers, scoop him up. I was actually able to get him off of waivers this week. I was ecstatic by that, especially when you see like 100 yards receiving halfway through the second quarter on a team like the Titans. Sign me up for that.
He has an amazing schedule rest of season, by the way. So if he has another good week this week, it's wheels up throughout. I think this is the last week he's going to be on a tricky decision for us.
Next, we have the battle of two just absolutely dog shit teams. The Saints are going into Carolina to play the Panthers. For the Saints, they have an implied team total of 25.5 points. For the Panthers, they have an implied team total of 18 points. I think that's generous from Vegas to say the Panthers score 18 points here. For the Saints, we are starting Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, and it looks like Derek Carr is going to be back. He's trending towards being back. The team is saying he's going to be back. So I'm assuming he's going to be back. The Saints boat raced this Panthers team week 1 this year, and Carr got off to that hot start. I feel great rolling him again. And we're sitting everyone else on the Saints. Nobody else even matters on this team, except for maybe Taysom Hill later, but I don't like him. Then for the Panthers, we are only starting Chuba Hubbard, and we're sitting the rest. So let's start with the Panthers first. My second team, kind of. I don't know what to do now with them because Bryce Young is starting this week. Andy Dalton has come off the injury report, so he is technically good to go in this game. But Dave Canales is rolling out Bryce Young again. I mean, I get why you do that, right? You probably want to make sure that Bryce Young is a total pumpkin before you give him a kiss on the forehead and pat him on the butt and send him on his way to another team, right? Unfortunately, though, for the Carolina Panthers, it means that everybody else on this team is basically dead from a fantasy perspective. Deontay Johnson got out right on time. Happy with all my Deontay Johnson shares now that they're in Baltimore and not subject to Bryce Young. But even though this Saints defense has played terribly, I mean, I ask you viewers, do you feel confident with Bryce Young and any fantasy assets attached to him? I get that he threw for 200 and two touchdowns last week, but that was like his, kind of dead cat bounce first game back, and he still looked like he had problems. I think it's just going to go downhill from here until Dalton takes over a little bit later. Then for the Saints, I think that Carr coming back to the Saints team is actually a huge boost. I'm guilty as charged of being excited to see Spencer Rattler. When Carr went out, I have said that I don't think Carr is a very good quarterback. I think the Saints should move on from him. I don't really know what they're doing with Derek Carr. That being said, they were unwatchable with the combination of Spencer Rattler and Jake Hayner. They'll at least be watchable and get your primary guys, Olave and Kamara, involved. With Rashid Shaheed out, Chris Olave, as long as Derek Carr stays healthy, he should finally start to be like the alpha target he's been drafted as for the last 2 years. Managers have not been happy with him, right? They've been drafting him second, third round, kind of expecting that massive target share, that massive utilization, not getting it, getting these weird like dud weeks from him, not being happy with him, but they don't really have any other options now unless they want to get Bub Means heavily involved. And then same with Kamara. He's playing banged up, but he's still a stud. Any thoughts on this one?
Just one brief one. Brooks practiced in full today. It
Mm,
does look like we're getting our Jonathan Brooks debut this week. I think Ted was correct in his assessment that for the time being, I believe it is Chuba's job. I think we're going to see him get worked in really slowly. This was a pick. What uh, why am I blanking on the head coach's name? Canales. What Canales said was that they want to run the skin off the football, right? That is what the core of his system is. And I think there's room for Chuba and Brooks to do that in the system. And I think Brooks will eventually be their one, but that's more of a next year thing, right? I think we're going to see a 2 to 3 week adjustment period where Brooks does not really get heavy work. I know you guys are excited, right? I drafted him in 20% roster exposure to Brooks, right? But you have to understand you made that pick for one reason and one reason alone. And that one reason and one reason alone was the last 2 to 3 games of the season where they have a really nice schedule and he may end up being a flex superstar for the playoffs. Do not go and rush him in your lineups this week. Don't rush him in your lineups next week. I would even say don't rush him in your lineups the week after. If you drafted him, when I took my Brooks shares was like round 11. If you drafted him in round 8 or 9, thinking that this was going to be a key component to your roster for the second half of the season or for the playoff stretch that we're kind of in here, right? We're actually past the halfway point of the year, right? You misappraised him. Okay. I hope if you're holding on to him, you're 4-4 or better. I hope you navigated that situation, and we're planning for the last 3-4 weeks of the year with him. Do not get him in your lineups now, and don't get Hubbard out of your lineups now. I think Hubbard's going to be perfectly viable for at least 2 more weeks.
yeah, I would just caution fantasy managers on the Hubbard thing, right? Like he's looked good so far this year, but I think we underestimate what Bryce Young can do to tank a football
Yeah,
team here. And I think if
yeah.
the Panthers look absolutely terrible these next couple weeks and nothing works, like we might just get Jonathan Brooks time a little bit early just because they want to see what they have in the kid, right? I think Chuba's a great player, and as long as he is on a decent team, he'll get there. But unfortunately, this might be. I was hearing John Middlecoff talk about this the other day. He's like, this Carolina Panthers team might be the worst team in history. They might be the least talented roster, less talented than the 0-16 Lions, less talented than the 0-16 Browns. Like, it's a miracle they got that win against the Raiders. Like, otherwise, I think we might be on a winless team watch here. But yeah, it's tough as a second fan of this franchise. I've only been a second fan for like a month, and I'm already exhausted.
You're taking a beating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Broncos at Ravens, a game I'm actually really excited to see. Sort of a measuring stick game for Drake May. The talk's getting a little out of hand, or Drake May, Bo Nix. Talk's getting a little out of hand with him, so I'm curious to see what the discourse is like afterward. But also, he has a chance to really cash out on those conversations. If he comes out and has a big game, man, the narratives around Knicks will be really interesting, and Sean Payton. All in all, I think it's been a tremendous year for him, for Sean Payton specifically. Broncos 18.5 point implied team total. Ravens with a 28 point implied team total at home. Lamar Jackson was a DNP today, but they said that was a planned rest day. His knee and his back, I think, were a little banged up. They said it was veteran rest. Don't worry, he's rolling. For the Broncos, sort of an interesting thing here. I know Jaleel had the big game last week, and I know the fantasy draft community was really big on Jaleel last week. This is the number one rush defense in the league. They are very, very good. They destroy the running game, right? So how are we viewing it? Nix and Sutton should have a really nice game script as well as a pass funnel team they're going against. I actually like them both this week a lot. I think in DFS, if that's a cheaper stack you want to target, I think you could do a lot worse. It probably will be a stack that I'm targeting in DFS. And then Williams is a sort of tricky decision. He's been operating as their one. He's had up weeks, down weeks. I would really think he's much closer to a sit this week for me. I hope with only 2 teams on bye, you have better options on your rosters. But I also know with the way this year's been for injuries, it's there's going to be rosters where you have to start him. What you're hoping for in this case is that they trail and he starts getting dump off passes from Nix, which Nix likes to do anyway. But at that point, how much is Jaleel eating into his workload? How consistent is that? Does he get the touchdown? Again, he's closer to a sit for me, but I can certainly see rosters where you're going to have to roll him out there. For the Ravens, at least for this week, we'll see if something drastically changes. Based on what I saw on Twitter, the general consensus is that the Deontay Johnson addition significantly drops the value of everyone in the Ravens but Lamar. I don't know if that's true. But I saw that tweet enough times that seems to be what the community feels about it. But in any case, it's not going to matter until next week. Lamar, Flowers, Henry. I think you're starting them all. I know Flowers is going to have the tough matchup, probably draw a good amount of Surtain in this one, but they also move him around enough. They do a good enough job. To me, the only concern with Flowers is do they get off to a big enough lead that they don't really need to pass it anymore? But the Broncos have also stayed competitive enough. We're comfortable calling these 3 guys sits. Where it will affect us a little bit is Mark Andrews. Up and down, I believe was the tight end 1 or 2 the last 3 weeks. Should be right behind Kittle, if I recall correctly. I think he outscored Bowers. Looked really, really good, and I'm totally comfortable with him rest of the season. I just think the game script, the addition of Deontay Johnson, we'll see how much he's involved. There are just enough factors in the air that, I'd start someone like Cade Otton over him. If you have one of those really high quality tight end 2s that you went and picked up off the waiver wire, like a Cade Otton, like a David Njoku, certainly I'm starting over him. That sort of thing. It just depends. I hope you don't have a 2 tight end roster, but if you do, there are a couple guys I might roll over him. And then we're sitting Bateman, Likely, and Deontay Johnson. You always give the wide receivers a week or 2 till they get in town to be acclimated before you're even going to really assess their value to the offense. Who knows? We'll see. Does Deontay Johnson slide into that Bateman role where Bateman's been quietly putting up high-end wide receiver 2 weeks, like sort of behind the scenes all of a sudden? I started to look at his point totals this year. I was like, wow, if Deontay Johnson takes all that work from him, sure. Like Deontay Johnson's going to be a low-end flex, high-end flex, maybe even a low-end wide receiver too. We're just not going to know for about 2 weeks, and I'm not going to be too bullish on Deontay until then. And Rashad Bateman's dead to me in fantasy terms, and so is Likely, I think. With that case. So that's how I see the game. That's how Ted sees the game.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I'm with you, right? I think maybe if anything, I'm a little bit more bullish on Deontay Johnson. I think that in this offense, in this Ravens offense, there'll be plenty of opportunity in the right situation, right? This Ravens team is liable to just run the ball down your throat if they could win that way. And in those games, I don't think the passing options will do as well. But yeah, Bateman's been balling out these past couple weeks. I think Deontay Johnson is a far better player. I've called him a poor man's Brandon Ayuk at times. I really like his route running. I think he's a pretty good player other than his hands, which aren't the best, but he's still a great player, right? And I think this is just a great move for the Ravens in general. I could see Deontay Johnson being a mid-range wide receiver 2 without really hurting Zay Flowers' fantasy value, right? And then for the Broncos, I guess I'll kind of plant my flag here. I don't think Bo Nix is very good. I think the Broncos have been the beneficiaries here of just playing really down, destitute teams. They've taken care of business. They're well coached by Sean Payton, right? I wouldn't be shocked to see Bo Nix get some points here just because this Ravens team, I think we've seen it now, right? Like that secondary without Mike McDonald is just straight up not the same. They're
Yeah.
they are like the biggest pass funnel defense in the league. They are number 1 by far in terms of rushing defense, but they just get chewed up in the passing game. So that's why Nix and Sutton are starts here, not because I particularly like the players, but because the defensive matchup is really good. All right, next we got the Oakland Raiders, who covered for me last week. Shout out, going into Cincinnati to play the Bengals, who we also want to bet on. So this is a good like gambling vibes bet. game for me. The Raiders have an implied team total of 18.5 points, and the Bengals have an implied team total of 26 points. For the Raiders, we're starting Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, and we're tricky decisioning Alexander Madison. Then for the Bengals, we're starting Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Chase Brown, and then we're sitting the tight ends and Zach Moss. And if you've noticed, we've had the same Bengals slide for like the past 3 or 4 weeks because we finally, I think, have like a pulse on what this Bengals team wants to do. So we'll start there first. Listen, man, even though they do this weird thing, they just haven't looked right all year, right? But Joe Burrow is such a great player still to me, right? I feel like the team around him has let him down. They're very talented at the skill positions, in my opinion. It's just either a coaching and defense thing. I don't situationally they're bad. I don't know exactly what it is, but even though the Bengals aren't winning, that doesn't mean you can't ride these fantasy guys to championships. Jamar Chase is the fantasy wide receiver one right now, even with his terrible start to the year, right? T. Higgins has been getting a bunch of targets, and Chase Brown has pulled away. He is the clear running back one. Chase Brown, truthers, you have been rewarded in your drafts. I know that was a toss up. In the draft season, people were kind of unsure. Some drafts Moss was going first, some drafts Brown was going first. Brown won, boys. It's Jover. Zach Moss is officially not really a thing unless unless Chase Brown gets hurt, I think. Like Zach Moss to me is like fancy Justice Hill at this point. He's just passing downs and getting a couple targets. He's not a very effective runner of the ball. Then for the Oakland Raiders, there's not a lot to like about this team. I think they have their better quarterback in Gardner Minshew, and Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers will be able to get there as a result. We're tricky decisioning Alexander Madison. He's kind of pulled away with this Raiders running back job. I know Zamir White, I think he got 2 carries last week. I believe Amir Abdullah got a little bit of work too, but it's primarily Madison here. He's a tricky decision in a easy defensive matchup because the player is bad. The player is bad and the Raiders are bad. Just goes to show you that the opportunity and workload sometimes, even though that's something I draft for and value very highly in fantasy, that's not always enough. Any thoughts on this one, Yanni? Any zingers you'd like to throw Antonio Pierce's way?
No, man, I'm kicking the guy while he's down. What a mess, though. What a mess they did. There was talks that they could get Dak Prescott at the end of this year and roll out Dak with Devontae, in their revaulted offense. It felt like they were a quarterback away from next year. So, like, if they played it well and they had the free agent class and they had a good draft, they were a quarterback away. They're so beyond that at this point. Bummer. Huge bummer, man. I grew up as a kid going to Raiders games in the Bay Area.
Nope.
All right. This is a Jameis Winston channel, by the way. We are pro Jameis Winston in this house, or whatever you. Dude, that guy, he cracks me up. He's got great vibes. He delivers his speeches with like the gusto, dude. He's like Mel Gibson when he talks about things. I could listen to Jameis just pontificate. I would love to hear him speak like philosophically, way beyond football. I want to know his thoughts on life. Just a hilarious, like, I don't know how to describe it, dude. Like a church pastor almost, the way he speaks. And it's hilarious considering his whole past of irresponsible behavior that sort of led to what appears to be a mature and buttoned up guy. This is a Jameis Winston channel, and it will continue to be for so long as he is in the NFL. Chargers, implied team total at 22 points. Browns with an implied team total at 20.5. For the Chargers, okay, there are only 2 players that I'm looking to start weekly on this roster, and those are going to be Dobbins and Ladd. I know Disley has had like a miniature breakout the last 2 weeks. I really don't think that's sticky, so much so that I don't consider him a viable fantasy asset. Like, we didn't list him this week. To me, it's more that Herbert seems to have really been going, but also Ladd seems to have ascended to where he's operating in such a way that the offense is opening up a little bit. I mean, we'll see, dude. If Disley has one more big week, he's probably going to be on our go pick him up list, and then he will start being listed on here. But to me, the way we're viewing this roster, Dobbins, you sort of have to start at least as a flex with upside, with like RB2 upside. He's getting so much work, and it seems like their other running backs simply aren't competent. His efficiency and explosive plays have been up and down. They've dropped off a little bit. He's certainly not the same player he was the first 3 weeks. But I also just think with the landscape of the league right now, with so many injuries to so many key players, he's much more of a start than he is someone that you're like switching in and out of your roster for most rosters, unless you did a really good job drafting. Ladd. just getting a little ahead of it. I am biased here, right? I had 30% roster exposure to Ladd. Loved the player in college. I was so jacked up seeing Jim Harbaugh compare him to Steve Smith, who, because I love Steve Smith too, right? One of my all-time favorite wide receivers. I don't know if that's an accurate comparison, and he's also always injured, and they have really low passing volume. All those things have to be considered. Is he a full-blown weekly start? No. But in this matchup, where the Browns have actually hemorrhaged some points to wide receivers this year on more than one occasion, and you would expect these rookies to only get better as the year goes on. It feels like Ladd and Justin are developing a certain kind of chemistry that's sort of special. Justin Herbert's wide receiver one is a great thing to be in fantasy. It's a great thing to be in fantasy. It has been for his entire career. So there, he's going to be a start this week. I am going to put him in my flex spot in more than one roster this week, and you should too. Now, the sort of tricky decision. This one's again more matchup dependent, right? I think this is a soft matchup to attack, but with there's only two teams on buys. I don't know how many rosters you're really doing this in, but I think Herbert's a perfectly fine streamer this week. Actually, he's been really efficient, man. He's had a couple 300-yard games, with average weapons around him. He looks like he's really settling into this system. He looks a lot healthier to me than he did a month ago. I would hope you have better options, but dude, if you're skimming your waiver wire and you're like, oh god, like I'm looking at Daniel Jones potentially going in one roster. Would I rather start Daniel Jones or Herbert? That's going to be a decision I have to make. Maybe I do throw Herbert in there. We'll see. The Browns, this one's a little more controversial, man, because who knows what to make of it. You have a new quarterback in there and it fundamentally changes the way the team runs. Here's my read on it. I'll let Ted read and jump in with his too after, because it is controversial, right? Here's how I view it. I think Tillman is the stud receiver on this team. It's not Jerry Jeudy. It's never been Jerry Jeudy. Fuck Jerry Jeudy. He's not a good football player. I've never liked Jerry Jeudy. I don't know why. I think it was all the people in his draft class. I was a huge Justin Jefferson guy, and I was thinking the Niners were going to get Justin Jefferson with their first round pick. He ended up going just before him, and they ended up getting Ayuk. But I was a huge JJ guy. I had him as the number one in the class when he was the consensus wide receiver 5. I got bashed for months for it. Jerry Jeudy's not a good football player. He's never been a good football player. He's never been an interesting football player. He was just good in college. I don't know why that was anyway. I have a personal thing about that. I dropped Jerry Jeudy in multiple leagues to get Tillman last week, so I'm biased here. I think Tillman keeps it up. I think Tillman's an actual good football player. I think it's not gimmicky, dude. He's not getting reverses. He's not getting screens and breaking them out. He's not throwing the Odell Beckham wide receiver pass where he, gets 6 points or that. He is just running really fundamentally sound routes. He's a big-bodied, athletic dude, and Jameis loves him. He's led the league in targets since Jameis took over the starting job. I am actually totally confident. I dropped some serious fab on him in a few leagues. I'm flexing him in a few leagues this week. So Tillman and Njoku are your starts. Jerry Jeudy and Moore is straight sits. This is a low volume, low passing volume game with 2 run first teams and 2 pretty good defenses. I don't think Jameis is going to throw it 45 times for 330 yards again. And unless he's doing that, I want no part of Jerry Jeudy or Moore. And then your tricky decisions, sort of tricky decisions. Jameis and Chubb, this has been a really nice sound rush defense in the Chargers. Chubb is clearly not healthy and will not be till next year. I actually offloaded him in the leagues that I had him, or at least one of the 3 leagues that I had him in this week. I would encourage you guys to try to do the same. But I think there's a reasonable chance that he may fall in the end zone. I think Ford is back this week, so we'll see if that receiving work falls off. He's sort of been working on third downs. I don't think that'll continue with Ford back. But yeah, so those are your tricky decisions, Jameis and Chubb.
Okay. So we'll start with the Browns first. I think I might just have a different read on what this Browns team is than you fundamentally. I know in the past they have been a very run-heavy team, a very Nick Chubb-centric team. I know that this year coming into the season, they were going to try and feature Deshaun Watson a lot more. So they've actually had a really high neutral pass rate with Deshaun Watson in there.
Yeah.
I think that Jameis being the quarterback fundamentally changes this team, and Kevin Stefanski is able to do the things he wanted to do with Deshaun Watson more effectively. So with Chubb's bionic knee, and I just don't think he's going to be right for the rest of this year, I think this Browns offense might be a pass-heavy, great fantasy offense, right? To me, Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore, they are sits. I think Tillman is clearly the guy that you want. But I think those guys, Jeudy or Moore, could have value here in this team, especially if Jameis is just going out there and throwing the ball. I think that we could see like the Geno Smith game plan, where he's dropping back 50 times a game, but just with Jameis Winston instead, who we saw it last week. He added something to this Browns team. I think it's a combination of not having a serial sexual assaulter, but your quarterbacks are for the good locker room vibes. Jameis in there. I don't know what it is, but I think those guys are more alive. I think it's just kind of a wait and see with them, right? I wouldn't be shocked to see Elijah Moore pop up here. I wouldn't be shocked to see Jerry Jeudy pop up here. I'm not as much of a hater as Yanni about Jerry Jeudy. I don't think he's like a great player or anything. I think he's a nice route runner, right? He does some things well, but not that great of a player. Then for the Chargers, I don't know. This Browns team they've played some good defensive points. They bottled up Saquon Barkley. They've bottled up a couple running backs. I think J.K. Dobbins. I know the Chargers want to run the ball here. I don't know how effective he'll be. I think that this Browns team is live to get up early, right? Like if the Browns go up one or two scores, you can only run the ball so much if you're the Chargers, right? Before you have to start passing it. So I think maybe I'm a little bit lower on Dobbins than Yanni. Maybe I know Yanni has not been high on Dobbins kind of all year. I've been a little bit higher on him. I just don't think this is the game for him. So I still say start because you probably have to, but I lean more towards tricky decision. I would sit him if you can. I think this might be a bigger Justin Herbert and Lad McConkey game, honestly. The Browns have a really good corner, number one corner, but the other guys have been able to be taken advantage of in the passing game. So we'll see. I think this is kind of a game where the Chargers may be chasing a lead here, despite being 2-point favorites in Vegas. So that's my
So,
read. We'll see with this Browns thing how it shakes out. But I think that a lot of the guys there, right, a lot of the fantasy pieces are going to be a lot more live with Jameis. I think this is like a Bryce Young to Andy Dalton situation in Cleveland. As a fan, you got to be happy about it. You actually get to see some real quarterback play for the rest of the year. And boys, he's not that different from Jordan Love. He's just not. They're built the same way. All right.
so just to explain though the J.K. dot, like, just for a little bit of context. Last week he got 17 carries for a touchdown and 7 targets, 4 receptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's tied for the team lead in targets. So
Mm-hmm.
no, I don't like the player, and no, this is a good defense. But if you're getting like 7 targets and then 15 to 20 carries, it's just the volume thing is pretty overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. You're absolutely right. I don't think he's a great player, and it's a tough matchup. So we'll see.
It's not an eruption spot. I'll say that. I don't have Dobbins pegged in an eruption spot here. Like
Yeah.
you must start him, but it's probably like you just start him because of the volume. All right, next we got Miami going into Buffalo to play the Bills. The Dolphins have an implied team total of 22 points, and the Bills have an implied team total of 27.5 points. For the Dolphins, we're starting Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle, and we're tricky decisioning Tua, Jonnu Smith, and Raheem Mostert. Then for the Bills, we're starting Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, and James Cook. We are sitting Keon Coleman, and we're tricky decisioning Amari Cooper. So let's start with the Dolphins first because I got to eat some crow here, boys. Listen, I've been the biggest A chain. I have been bullying the Devon A chain truthers for a while now. I've been saying you guys are stupid, and you know what? He had a good game. He had a good game on Sunday against the Cardinals. Granted, that's not a great defense, but I think we saw what we need to see with A Chain, right? With Tua under center, the opportunity is going to be there at least enough in the running game, and he's going to be getting the targets. It's not Mostert as the clear one with A Chain being a complementary piece like I thought it might have been. Now that we have the Mostert data in there, right? Like I think it's fair to say it's fine. It's fine. I might have overblown it a little bit, boys. I'm sorry. Listen, I just don't. If you have 21 touchdowns last year, like Raheem Mostert does, like I think it's a bold call to give A Chain more run, like they have been. It's a good one. I think he's at least a good enough player, right? So I don't think it's a bad decision, especially being a 49ers fan. I've seen Raheem Mostert before. He is made of glass. He's liable to go down again. But yeah, A Chain, fire him up here. Good matchup. We're starting Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Now that Tua is back, right? This is kind of what you've been waiting for. If you've had the luxury of being able to sit Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, this is the moment. In theory, like if they're going to go off and they're going to start win you leagues down the stretch, this would be the time. That being said, though, we're going to tricky decision Tua here. Tua he played pretty well last week against the Cardinals, 3 for 300. I believe he had 1 or 2 touchdowns. Like it was a solid game from him. It was a breath of fresh air for Miami fans, I'm sure. The reason we are tricky decisioning him, though, is that his history against the Bills, especially in Buffalo, is terrible. They've gotten boat raced multiple times against the Bills. Tua has not had his best games against the Buffalo Bills. They kind of have his number. Granted, this Bills defense, I think they're worse without Jordan Poyer or Micah Hyde on the team. But I don't feel great about Tua, and since his brains are scrambled eggs, he does not have the rushing upside that brings that floor up for you as a fantasy asset. Johnny Smith, he's just kind of a side piece in this Dolphins offense right now that they have a legitimate quarterback who can run Mike McDaniel's system. He's liable to catch a couple passes in the wasteland that is the tight end position. And then Raheem Mostert, he had a very inefficient week last week. I believe it was like, oh, man, I was looking at the box score. I didn't pay super close attention to it. I think it was like 30-ish yards or 20 yards and 2 touchdowns or something. He was getting the goal line work though, which is important to note. He's not completely going away, but I think Yahoo has been right the entire year when they called A-Chain 1A and Mostert 1B. I think he's like a nice complementary piece that will get some work in this offense. It's just tricky decision. Don't like the player. He's getting old. You know, then for the Buffalo Bills, we're starting Josh Allen. That's a no-brainer. Dalton Kincaid finally had a big week last week. Shout out! As soon as we put him on tricky decision, he went off. I mean, when you play the Seattle Seahawks, that'll sometimes it's a get right game. Khalil Shakir, now that he's been able to move into the slot with Amari Cooper coming to town, he's looked really great. He went over 100 yards last week. I believe it was like 10 targets. I think he's going to be money going forward. You absolutely want him in there. And then James Cook, I think this guy might be like one of the draft picks that's highest correlated with like either leading your league or advance rates and underdog. James Cook has been amazing. It's been the best case scenario for him, right? Like I think the question about James Cook coming into this year is does this Bills team trust him enough to give him the goal line work? And not only is he like gotten that, he's been like, if you want to call Josh Allen the Batman of this Bills offense, James Cook has been robbing, bro. Like he's been good, man. Keep firing him up, especially for like a fourth, fifth round pick money. We're sitting Keon Coleman. I just don't think that with all of the pass catchers now, right? In Buffalo, they went from almost feeling a little bit undertooled to now they got a lot. They got a lot of guys there, right? This is just kind of a separation, a little bit of a contested catch guy. You could probably do better. I just don't know. I know Coleman got into the end zone last week, kind of mossed Tariq Woolen, apparently the PFF #1 rated cornerback. Don't know how that's possible, but I don't know. You could probably do better. And then same with Amari Cooper. He hasn't gotten there since he hasn't gotten you there in terms of fantasy since he's gotten to the Buffalo Bills. I think they didn't trade for him for nothing though, right? I think it's just a matter of time that you see him pop up. He does draw Jalen Ramsey this week though. That's not an ideal matchup, but still like the player enough to be considered a tricky decision. He's in a really good offense. When you're attached to Josh Allen, it's a good spot to be. Thoughts on this one?
I think you pretty much nailed it.
You were there longer than me with A Chain. You had more faith, Yanni, and it turns out you won that one.
Yeah, but I mean, again, dude, I don't know. I don't know. It's not like a win or lose thing. You said to trade him away right after Tua got injured. And if you had traded him at that peak value, like I was talking to guys for getting like CD Lamb plus ETN for A-Chain, if I had made a move like that, like I would probably, I would have had 5 weeks without him. So no, I think it's fine. But I do think long term, yeah, it's A-Chain. We'll see, dude. We'll just see what it looks like. He looks like a premium fantasy asset
If
for sure.
you had to like rank him like in terms of the running backs for rest of season, where would you put A Chain at this point?
High. I'd have to look at schedules, and part of the problem is there are so many other running back. He's somewhere in 5 to 10 though. He's not top five.
Oh, you
To
think
provide
5 to 10? Okay, so I was thinking like
6 to 10.
10 to 15, maybe 20. Like I see
So
him as like a low one, high two, personally.
not
Like you think he's like
like
the
a mid
guy?
range.
Okay, okay.
I think
Well,
he's, dude. I mean, look, like what you called out though is again still valid. I'm not saying you're wrong. Mostert had 2 touchdowns. He took 2 touchdowns off him. It's just that A-Chain is getting the volume of a wide receiver too. He's producing at a wide receiver 2 level with the upside that he might rush in a touchdown or get another 40 to 60 on the ground. And that's, look, volume's king. That's really hard to beat. Yeah, I don't know that we just have to see, dude. Like we got to see where things go the rest of the season. But I have a feeling if you bought low on A Chain, you're about to start. A guy traded Chuba Hubbard for A Chain in one of my leagues, like a few weeks ago. He got Chuba Hubbard plus a piece for A Chain. That might be a league swinging move.
Yeah.
Okay, should be a very good game, dude. Two teams that need a win, need to keep it going. Cowboys 24.5 implied team total. Falcons 27 implied team total at home. Indoor game. This game should be really offense friendly. Hopefully, we get to see one of those Falcons shootouts we've gotten a couple times this year. They're really fun. It's really fun when this team's rolling, and it's really fun when the Cowboys are rolling. For the Cowboys, I think the clear starts, even though he's actually disappointed the last month, I was really surprised at how Ferguson has looked. He picked up that MCL injury earlier in the season, and that can create like a 2 to 4 week depression in production and being able to cut a little bit. Maybe that's it, but also the Cowboys as a whole have looked kind of down. Tolbert's been eating some targets. Dowdle's been eating some targets. I don't know what it is exactly, but I would call Ferguson the disappointment on the season overall. But I do think in this matchup, it's a really good matchup. It's a really friendly game script. I think you're rolling him out there. And really with tight end, I don't think you're benching him for anyone anyway. But Dak, Ferguson, CD, start them. Your sits are going to be Zeke and Dalvin. Dalvin, absolutely not. I know I saw Zeke getting picked up in leagues left and right. It feels like they like Dowdle the most. It feels like Dowdle will be the guy. There's just some weirdness with him getting sick and now Dalvin potentially being active this week. And that's why we have Tolbert and Dowdle as sort of tricky decisions. I probably would prefer to sit Dowdle this week just because I want to see what they're going to do with it. If I knew it was going to be the splits it was at the Giants game, I would start Dowdle. But to me, there's just enough uncertainty there. And again, only two teams on bye. I'll probably look elsewhere on my Dowdle rosters. But I think, yeah, you look, if you throw him in the flex, if he gets 60% of the work like he was getting, maybe even 70% of the work, you're going to be perfectly happy with that decision. To me, what they should do is they should cut Zeke out of the whole mix and roll with Cook and Dowdle. Cook looked better than Zeke to me. Who knows what they'll do? Tolbert, all attention on CD. Tolbert's had a few boom weeks this week. Certainly for DFS, I like him in your roster. If you're going to take a cheap dart throw, you can certainly do a lot worse. Falcons, Bijan, London, and Pitts, man, as advertised on all three of them. More recently for Bijan, really pretty season long for Pitts and London after their slow starts. It looks like you're getting what you paid for on those guys. And there was a lot of risk in that, man. Good for the guys who took the shot because you bought them at their absolute ceilings for most of them. Maybe Pitts would have gone more like 4 or 5 turn instead of 5, 6 or 6, 7 turn if we had known. But I think that took some bravery, and I think you're seeing the returns on that. And I think you're going to continue to see the returns rest of season. You have to feel really good if you own any of those guys, slide them in your roster. Good for you if you bought low on Pitts or Bijan when everyone was selling him. They've really cut him loose after he recovered fully from his little injuries he picked up midseason. And then your sort of tricky decisions are Cousins and Mooney. I think Mooney might do well this week. I've never liked starting players like that where they might get 3 points, he might get 20, and that's really cool. But I would always, it depends, matchup dependent. I would almost always rather someone with some floor. And then Cousins, really disappointing after he kind of exploded to start the year. However, this Cowboys matchup is so quarterback friendly in terms of they're going to put up so many points. Their D-line's banged up. The Falcons should be able to really move the ball. There's a potential that this thing breaks 50 points like Vegas thinks, 51.5 point over under. I would probably be starting other people, but again, perfectly reasonable. If you have to roll Cousins out, this is probably the week to do it. I don't know if he should be on your rosters. I don't know if he's someone you should be looking at weekly, but for this week, I think he does just fine.
Yeah. Let me see here. I guess so. I do want to touch on Rico Dowdle a little bit. I think that I'm not sold on Dalvin Cook being good at all. I think against the Niners, he had like 6 carries for 12 yards or something, right? I think everyone knows that Zeke is toast at this point. I think if this Cowboys team is serious about winning football games, and I think that they actually are, that they're just a bad team, right? It should be Rico Dowdle's job. I would be shocked to see him get less than 70% of the snaps here in this one against this Falcons defense that has not lived up to the billing for what their talent is, right? I like him here. I have one league where I have like Tank Bigsby, Rico Dowdle, and like Bucky, and I have to pick one of them. I'm rolling with Dowdle this week. Then just for I guess Darnell Mooney, I think he'll get there, assuming that it's a game where the Falcons have to score points, right? Like Kirk Cousins has looked okay. Like, I mean, if he played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 17 times a year, he'd be the MVP of the league. But this Cowboys defense still is not great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think Mooney's a clear number two option in the offense at a minimum, right? It's just if you think Kirk Cousins will have success against a team, I think he will have success against this Cowboys team. So I do like Mooney a little bit more. All right, next we got the Washington Redskins going into New York to play Yanni's second team, the New York Giants. The Redskins have an implied team total of 24 points, and the Giants have an implied team total of 20 and a half points. For the Redskins, we're starting Jaden Daniels, Scary Terry, and Brian Robinson, and we're tricky decisioning Zach Ertz. And for the Giants, we're starting Malik Neighbors and Devin Singletary, and then we're tricky decisioning Danny Dimes, Wandale, and Darius Slayton. So let's start with the Skins here first. Listen, man, these guys broke my heart on Sunday. Through an act of God, I missed out on an undefeated gambling week, which would have been sick. But listen, man, if you had any doubts about Jaden Daniels, if you were still on the fence about Jaden Daniels, which might be like 1% of the population, he's for real, boys. This guy is a stud, absolute monster. Listen, I get the Giants' defense is playing better, but I have Jaden in my top five for fantasy quarterbacks rest of the way, potentially even higher than that. Scary Terry, he's been getting you there on the long stuff, right? Now that Cliff Kingsbury has had more faith in Jaden to push the ball down the field, and he's been doing it effectively. Terry's eating on these deep routes. He doesn't have to get targeted that much to get there. I think he had like 111 or like 120 yards last week, something like that, on like maybe 5 catches. So as long as he gets some volume of targets, he will get there. And I believe the way you attack this Giants team on defense is through the air. So should be a good week for him. Then Brian Robinson, I don't love the player, but he's in a good offense and he's the clear RB1. That's worth something to me. I have him as like an RB2 this week. Then tricky decision, Zach Ertz. We make fun of the Bowser guy on Twitter because I bullied him about his Ben Sano take. Listen, man, I didn't see Zach Ertz having this type of role in the offense. He has been, listen, he's a fossil. Do I think he's like a good tight end? No, but he catches the ball and he's good enough to be relevant. I have him on an underdog roster, right? That's best ball for those of you who don't know what underdog is. And that's a roster with Brock Bowers. I think Brock Bowers, I've taken 60 of his points, and Ertz is like I've taken 45 of his points. Like Zach Ertz is pretty close to like tight end one territory. How long does that last? I don't know, but hey, if your quarterback's Jaden Daniels, you might get there. Then for the Giants, Malik Neighbors, I I feel okay with this start. I don't love it though. I don't have him inside my top 12, but he's definitely startable this week. Devin Singletary, it looks like Tyrone Tracy's going to be out. The Giants running backs, man, over the past couple weeks, they've looked good. They've been the bright spot on this offense, I think. I like Devin Singletary as a player. I think Tyrone Tracy might just be a stud that the Giants drafted, so he might be the second best running back on the team, but he's still a very good second best running back. He should have success here, I think. And then we're tricky decisioning Dimes, Wandale, and Slayton. Danny Dimes, he's had a rough couple weeks. He's just been pedestrian, right? He's not scoring. You can throw for as many yards as you want to, but if you do not score, like your fantasy scores are not going to be great, right? So I think he's been between like 10 to 12 points like the past 2 weeks or something, just not awesome. And I think we have to be on alert for this Redskins team. It's a defense that me and Yanni have been calling bad all year. I did not expect to see what I saw on Sunday, though, with how they basically shut down Caleb Williams for the majority of the game. I think we might have to readjust our takes on this Redskins defense and call them competent. And I don't like Dimes as a player against a competent defense. That might be tough. It's a tricky decision. I would really have to be strapped at the quarterback position to have to roll him out, though. Wandale, the PPR scam. Listen, if the Giants go down, Wandale could have 10 grabs for 62 yards for all we know, and he could get you there in PPR. Then Slayton, yeah, he's a fine DFS start throw, I guess. He would be by far and away the third option I'd take. This is like if you think the Giants are getting boat raced here and are trying to chase a lead, maybe he gets some garbage time yards. Thoughts on this one, brother?
Nah, man, you got it. And also, Ertz is between the tight end. I think he's like 7 in full PPR and 9 in half PPR. Maybe he's like,
Unbelievable, man.
yes, he is a tight end one.
Doing it at the ripe age of 50 years old. What a stud.
Yeah, man. Hey, good for him. Okay, should be an interesting game to see what direction these two seasons are headed, right? Bears at 21 and a half points implied team total. Cardinals at 23 at home. Um, for the Bears, I saw people saying it was really an interesting take coming into the season was if you draft Brock Purdy over Caleb Williams, you're doing fantasy wrong. And it's the idea that we're not here to play for second place or third place. You're here to win championships, and Caleb has championship upside. And there was that vision there, right? And I do understand as a player, and I do think, by the way, he's heading to being that type of player. And I think we've seen flashes of it this year. But there's something to be said in fantasy for consistency, for a nice high floor, for boring players that show up every week. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a more conservative person temperamentally, man. I like those players. Caleb has been very up and down this year. Okay. So me and Ted had a little back and forth. I think he's closer to a start for me this week because of the matchup. But Ted also has heavy Bears bags this year, and he's been watching them more closely than I have. So I defer to him on that one. DJ Moore and Swift starts. You're starting your studs in this offense, even though DJ Moore's had a rough, I think a rough 2-week patch here, if I recall correctly, right, Ted? You had him on one.
Yep, it was
Right.
the eye poke in London. So like Keenan
Yep.
Allen went off, right? And then just Caleb was
And then a
toast
bye
against
week
the
off.
Redskins. Yeah.
Well, I think the game script, I think the secondary, I think this is a good matchup, and I think Swift is a great start. And also a fun fact, we don't have him listed on here, but Roshan Johnson is the only player in the NFL to score on 100% of his carries inside the 5-yard line. Sort of interesting. Just an interesting thing to keep track of if he keeps scoring in there. Um, your sort of tricky decisions on the Bears are going to be Caleb, Allen, Odunze, and Komet. Komet is currently the tight end 8 or 7 on the year and half PPR, and George Kittle's out, who's the tight end 1. So technically, in terms of active tight ends this week, he's like the tight end 6 or 7 on the year. But as Ted has rightly pointed out, he has really high variance, right? He had a big spike week, and he has not consistently had that. And that's been with Odunze and Allen in and out of the lineup. He's not a locked and loaded tight end 1 as far as we're concerned. And we're treating him like that this week with the tricky decision. We're going to learn a lot about Caleb this week, I think. They really need to bounce back if they're going to stay competitive for a wild card spot here. And the Cardinals are on fire right now, and they're competing hard for what they have to imagine is also the same spot. These two teams may be in competition. This may end up being a playoff tiebreaker. So we're going to learn a lot. We're going to learn a lot about where Caleb's at as a player here. For the Cardinals, you have the kind of the dream for fantasy in a lot of ways, which is a beautifully condensed offense. You got your Kyler Murray, right, with your rushing upside. You feel good if you're plugging him into your lineups every week. I have a first place roster with Kyler on it. I rarely take quarterbacks high, but he was up there in like the late 6th round. I thought I'd take a shot. I'm actually very happy I did, even though he hasn't been amazing this year. Marvin Harrison Jr., we told you to buy low on him. He's starting to come around. Very tough matchup here. This is his last tough matchup of the year, and I expect to probably be his worst game rest of season. But he's looked so good. I think you want to get him in your lineups anyway, even with the matchup. James Conner and Trey McBride. Dude, all these guys, it's just a really nice system where it's Trey and Marvin Harrison Jr. for the most part. They're going to cede some touchdowns to the 3rd and 4th passing options, but for the most part, it's them moving the ball. Then you have James Conner in there who's taking the majority of the rushes. And Kyler's going to run the ball. You're sitting Michael Wilson. You're sitting the human Dortch, even though Michael Wilson's been kind of cool. If Marvin Harrison Jr. goes down, go get him. Until he does, you're not going to. But yeah, roll out your studs on the Cardinals, man. Roll them out with confidence. That was a really good offense to buy into if you bought into them in the offseason. I think you have to feel good about it going forward, especially with their nice soft end of season schedule.
Yeah, man. This Cardinals team, I think they're better than advertised. I think.
Yeah.
I had kind of called this out early. I had them as the second best team in the NFC West behind the 49ers. It was a weird start to the season, but if Kyler plays well, right, like this Cardinals team, I think just goes to the next level. And historically, Kyler has performed much better at home. He's not a good road quarterback, and he usually isn't good after a win. Like he has trouble stringing together consecutive wins. I think like there's some stat he hadn't won consecutive games in like for 16 straight contests or something like that, right? It's like always win, loss, loss, win, but I don't know. I think they might be turning the corner here in Arizona. A lot to be optimistic about. I only put Michael Wilson on there because I think he is the clear two at this point. In a better matchup, I think he would have consideration for tricky decision. But this Bears defense is still good. Their secondary is really good. Where you get them is on the ground. I really like this spot for James Conner. For the Bears, I just think that I don't know if it is Caleb just destroying the bad defenses, right? Like he had really good weeks against the Jacksonville Jaguars, for example, right? Like he's looked better against really bad defenses, but when the competition gets better, like sometimes to me he looks a little uneasy in the pocket. I think I texted Yanni this when I was watching the game on Sunday. I was like, he's taken off and running like he's Anthony Richardson. Like he's not comfortable sitting there. It looks like he's trying to escape rather than just kind of make his reads in certain situations. So we'll see if the Cardinals can rattle him here. That's why he's a tricky decision for me. Yanni had him as a start. I wouldn't do it. I have a league where I have Caleb and Gino. I'm starting Gino this week, and I hate the Seahawks. So I just need to see a little bit more from him. Keenan Allen to me is the distant third option on this team. He Listen, he had his spike week when DJ Moore got his eye poked and missed like a quarter, and Keenan Allen got 2 touchdowns within that time. It was like when the Bears were pouring it on the Jaguars. I don't like him at all here. I would almost call him a sit. But I mean, just based on the consideration, if you think Caleb plays well, then he kind of has a chance. It's just kind of I like him the third best. Same with Roma Dunze. I have him far lower than DJ Moore on my list of like how I like the Bears pass catchers, but I think near the end here it's gonna clearly be him over Keenan. And then Yanni covered Cole Kmet. He's just like if you think you can target those weeks where Caleb plays really good and he gets the looks, he's live, but I think he's also liable for a 2 or 3 pointer. So that's where I'm at. I will be watching this game, by the way. I'm very fascinated. I think this is a toss up personally. I don't know who takes this one. All right, next we got the Jacksonville Jaguars going into Philly to play the Eagles. The Jaguars have an implied team total of 19 points, and the Eagles have an implied team total of 26.5 points. Is this the week Doug Peterson gets fired? We'll see. For the Jaguars, we're starting Brian Thomas Jr. if he goes, and Evan Ingram. We're sitting Travis Etienne, and then we're tricky decisioning Trevor Lawrence and Tank Bigsby. Then for the Eagles, we are tricky decisioning either Goddard or Calcaterra, depending on if Goddard goes or not. Either way, the tight end is a tricky decision, and we start absolutely everyone else on this Eagles team. So let's start with the Eagles here. Listen, man, it's very easy. It's super condensed, and all of the guys are studs. Jalen, Saquon Barkley, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. They all do different things, right? Jalen, he's not your traditional quarterback, but he has all of the rushing upside in the world. We saw last week the first week where the tush push just absolutely pushed him far and away into the quarterback one on the week, and Saquon kind of got shafted because of that. But Saquon got there in his own right. I think he was over 100 yards. It's just kind of, I wouldn't take too much of it into account, but just know that if the Eagles are inside the 1 yard line, it's probably not Saquon's time. AJ Brown, he's just a stud. He's an absolute monster. He's a really good football player. And Devontae Smith, I think in tougher defensive matchups, right? He would be the first one I think would get phased out of an offensive game plan, but this Jaguars team is like bottom three against the pass. It should be a drubbing, I think, here. Then for the Jaguars, listen, man, Christian Kirk broke his collarbone, Gabe Davis is injured, and now Brian Thomas is injured. So, like, if things shake wrong for this Jaguars team, they're going to be missing their top three wide receivers. I think this is an explosion spot for Evan Ingram against a defense that can be passed on. This would be a good week to start him, I think. Then, I mean, I guess the only other thing to talk about on this Jaguar side is the ETN Tank Bigsby thing, right? ETN has missed the last 2 weeks with his hamstring. I'm very interested to see what happens when ETN comes back. I wonder if Tank Bigsby has just played himself into the A side of this role at this point. It would shock me if he has because ETN has just been so good for so long. Or not so long, but like as long as he's been in the game, right? He's been a good player. It's just like I don't know if the Jaguars are going to move him. I don't know what their deal is. I would think that if you're trying to seriously win football games, you'd want to get him the ball. If he plays, maybe it happens here with all the wide receivers being crippled, but who knows? And then Trevor Lawrence, tricky decision. I think it has to be said for him, right? He's looked absolutely terrible at points this year, but over the past 3 weeks, he's actually been okay. Like he's clearly under the expectation of what we all thought Trevor Lawrence would be at this point in his career, but he's been doing decent for fantasy. Like he's not a one quarterback league starter or anything, right? But in Superflex, I feel like you probably have to be starting him at this point. That's why it's a tricky decision. Use your best judgment. Like if your choice is Joe Flacco or Trevor, I'd probably start Joe Flacco. I really like his spot there, right? But if it's like Dimes or Trevor, I'd be rolling Trevor. So I kind of have him as like a mid-range QB2 this week. Thoughts on this one, Yanni?
Nah, man, you did a good job. You got it.
Shout out Cooper DeJean, dude. Huge pass breakup last week. I think he made a tackle on the 1 yard line. Dude looks like a baller, man. White chocolate. Let's go.
Culture changer.
Yeah.
Okay, Rams at Seahawks. Really interesting game for where the NFC West is heading, right? Rams implied team total of 25 points. Seahawks with an implied team total of 20.5, 23.5. The Rams are fully loaded, man. They have both their studs back. Kyron's absolutely balling. Looks like they drafted a decent tight end this year. Their tertiary wide receivers are going off. Yeah, really good. And Stafford had his first like boom week of the year last year. Obviously, he has all his guys back for the first time this season. And Cup was so unhealthy last year. We really didn't get a good idea of what this offense would look like if Cup and Puka were both really rolling. And Cup looked great last week. I think we're going to see that now, and I'm curious to see where the team goes now that they are both rolling. So, in that note, this is a pretty soft defense, man. They like to give up points, and they put up enough points, especially against this Rams offense. I think this is a fantasy game you really want to target, whether that's in redraft or DFS. We're going to start Kyron, obviously. We're going to start Stafford. We're going to start Cup. We're going to start Puka. If you need to stream a quarterback this week, Stafford's a great choice, man. I would totally comfortably throw Stafford out there if you need to. The only sit's going to be Parkinson. He's had like 7 points in half PPR the last 2 weeks. He's just not a fantasy relevant option at this point. You could do a lot better even as a 1 week stream. For the Hawks in a matchup like this, roll Geno out there, man. If you have like Baker Mayfield at Kansas City, even though he's been great this year, I would probably rather start Geno. You have Jordan Love playing with his injured groin. I would actually probably rather start Geno just because of the injury risk that's going on there. Jared Goff popped up with an injury this week. Apparently, he rolled his ankle. He's at Minnesota or Green Bay? Green Bay,
Green Bay.
right? Green Bay. So he's at Green Bay, and they've been a pretty good passing defense. I think that's a toss-up, dude. Rolled the ankle, and they're probably going to run the shit out of the ball. Like I wouldn't hate you if you want to start Geno over him. I think Geno's a very good start this week. Kenneth Walker the third. You're never sitting Kenneth Walker the third, and then DK. DK was a game time decision last week. Mike McDonald said he feels good that he's going to be available, so we're treating it in this for all intents and purposes like he is rolling, and you are starting him when he's out there. The offense looked like they really missed him last week. Straight sit is going to be JSN. He's had 2 spike weeks and the rest are garbage. Love the player, hate the situation, hate the usage, and hate what he's been in the NFL so far. You simply cannot start him. And then your sort of tricky decisions are going to be Fant and Lockett. Fant's been one of those guys that I've seen floating off and on waivers. He'll have a good week. Someone will pick him up to speculate. Then he has a bad week. You probably don't want to be starting him unless you're in an absolute emergency. I would rather start Taysom Hill or Jonnu Smith over him this week if you're streaming for Kittle. And then your Lockett. Yeah. I started him last week. He lost me a week. I started him over Ramondre Stevenson in my flex and full PPR. That was a bad move, and that was a league where I was in second place too. I've got to turn off my ringers. The Dodgers just won the World Series. Anyway, so that is what is going on with the Seahawks, with the Rams. I think it's going to be a really good game. I think this game is going to define where these two team seasons are heading. All of a sudden, the Rams are on a serious roll here, man. If they win this game, in terms of rankings, in terms of wild card competition, in terms of competition for the NFC West, they can really change the outlook of their season and maybe even their franchise, depending on how good they really start looking. They're really banged up on the O-line. I would think that will limit their upside down the road, but we'll see. We'll see. That's what I got.
Yeah, Lockett is a much better guy to have. It is a best ball option where you don't have to make the choice of whether or not you
Yeah.
start him on a week and you just are happy when he scores the points.
Yeah.
Listen,
Cool.
man, I think this Rams team with the two big receivers in Cup and Puka, this is like one of we were talking about condensed fantasy offenses earlier. This is one of the best examples of that I can think of. I think they're going to be limited by their offensive line and just how bad their defense is. But I think this Rams team is going to be in a lot of like high scoring games. Should be really good for fantasy whenever you see the Rams on your schedule, I would think. Then for the Seahawks, I don't really have much else on them. JSN, I almost lean towards tricky decision on this one. I get that he has been disappointing this year, but I think this could be a back and forth contest. We'll see. This NFC West is like one of the more fascinating divisions this year. I think it's a lot closer than pretty much anyone had thought it would be, including Niners fans. At any rate, go to the next one. Here it is. It's the Detroit Lions going to Green Bay to play the Packers. The Lions have an implied team total of 25.5 points, and the Packers have an implied team total of 22 points. For the Lions, we are starting absolutely everyone other than Jamison Williams, who we'll see how long that suspension is. Then for the Packers, we're starting Jordan Love, Josh Jacobs, Tucker Kraft, Jaden Reed, and Romeo Dobbs, and we're tricky decisioning not Justin Watson, Christian Watson. So let's start with the Lions first. When they're rolling, there is nothing like it in the world. I don't think they just hung 50. They hung over 50 points on the Titans last week, and that's a really good defense. I get that football is a complementary game. I get that when your offense can't pick you up, sometimes things can snowball, but it takes something impressive to hang that many points on a football team that I think has a good defense. This Detroit Lions team is rolling, and this Packers team cannot stop the run to save their lives. I think huge Gibbs week, huge Monty week. I think without Jameson in there, right, Laporte is a little bit more live to do something. I like everyone here. Then for the Packers, I think okay, here's the deal with this. Jordan Love, I think a lot of this has to depend on if he goes in this game. As we've noted many times during the show, I am not a Jordan Love guy, but he makes all of these fantasy options around him live. If it's Malik Willis instead of Jordan Love, if Jordan Love can't go, and I'd be surprised if he can't go, this is a huge matchup. The Packers are going to want him to go at all costs. I would only, if it's Malik Willis, I would only start Josh Jacobs and Jaden Reed, maybe lean towards tricky decision. But we're saying that he goes here. This Packers team, they're the baby Lions, lots of mouths to feed. Who gets there? Josh Jacobs has continued to get his touchdowns here. He's getting the regression. That's what happens when you're a good running back and a good offense. Tucker Kraft has been a nice surprise. Awesome waiver wire pickup if you got him. I believe he's the tight end 3 on the year in PPR. Maybe a trade high candidate. Not sure. Could show up on the show next week, but we'll see. And Romeo Dobbs, ever since the squeaky wheel game, he's gotten there. This Lions pass defense is not good. I would expect the Lions to score points here. The Packers to probably be behind in throwing the ball, which would make all of these passing options live. Then Christian Watson, I feel like we have to put him as a tricky decision just because of his history, right? Or at least this year. This year he has not gotten you there, so it is a speculative play if you want to play him in this one. Like I said, though, this Lions pass defense is not good. They allowed Calvin Ridley over 100 within the first quarter and a half of their last game. Who knows? It could be the Watson explosion week, but I feel like it's been a tough enough ride where we'll say tricky decision until we see it from him. And then I'm noticing we are missing a Wicks on here. Yanni, where would you put Wicks? Just sit, not fantasy relevant?
Not fantasy relevant at this point.
Okay,
He's dropped too much. The consolidation is shaken out in that offense.
fair enough. All right.
He's like a receiver.
Any other thoughts on this one, or?
You know me, just hurt that Watson is not what I thought he was. Came into the year with a 25% target share with Jordan Love when everyone was on the field, but Reed has really exploded. Jacobs looks really good. Kraft is totally viable. Dobbs has looked great. He seems to be the odd man out. Unless it's a really plus matchup, we're not going to have him as even a tricky decision at this point.
Fair enough.
All right, Colts at Vikings. The Joe Flacco led Colts, 20.5 implied team total going against the Vikings with a 26-point implied team total. I believe this game was flexed into Sunday night, which is surprising. It was either flexed into it or flexed out of it. I would think it was flexed out of it, but I think I saw today it's flexed into it. For the Colts, I actually think Joe Flacco is a perfectly reasonable either streamer or second quarterback for those two QB rosters. I just think this matchup's really tough, and this is a matchup where you probably want to attack on the ground pretty heavily. Jonathan Taylor's back to being totally healthy, But in general, get used to this layout. This is what it's going to look like for us. 80 Mitchell and Pierce are simply not getting the volume to be fantasy relevant. Pittman and Downs should both be really nice options. Downs, for all we know, man, with how crazy productive that guy has been in the right spots, and he was with Flacco, he might work his way into top 24 weekly consideration. We just don't know. He should not be on any waiver wires. Get him. Pittman did really well with Flacco, and Pittman's a really good receiver. Really, with any quarterback besides Anthony Richardson, he's been a really good receiver. It's not really it. Well, it is an Anthony Richardson thing. I don't know what it is. He's done very well though when it's not Anthony Richardson. So roll out JT, roll out Pittman, roll out Downs, and do so confidently. I'm perfectly fine. I mean, JT, it doesn't need to be said. He's a weekly starter, and I think he may end up developing into a league winner as the season goes on here. But Pittman and Downs, like, perfectly reasonable, man. They should be your flexes in most leagues. You did a really damn good job drafting if you aren't looking at one of those two guys as a flex option. And this week should be no different. Should have a nice game script, should have to throw the ball a lot. For the Vikings, again, very similar to what you've seen all year out of us, except Darnold sort of fluctuated, right? But this is a great matchup for him. Get Darnold in there, get JJ in there, get AJ in there, sit Hawkinson if he goes. You want to sit him the first week or two off a major injury like that. That was just a gruesome injury, dude. As serious as an injury as you come back from in the NFL. So you certainly want to give him time. We kind of see what Chubb is looking like working through that. It'd be easier for a tight end, right? Especially if, he's running those little short routes in the end zone, but give him a week or two. Do not put him out there the first week he's back, which may be this week. Addison, your sort of tricky decision. I hope in redraft you're not at the point where you're seriously considering flexing him. You can do so with a hope and a prayer that he gets some points, but there are so many guys I would rather be starting over him. I could not believe I was actually able to unload Addison off a lot of my rosters this year. I had like 2 or 3 shares of him, and people actually traded for him. So I guess there is some community sentiment of belief in him. Abandon that. It's he's just too up and down. He's gonna have spike weeks, maybe. There's too much target competition. Sam Darnold's a little too inconsistent, and JJ and AJ are soaking up way too much of the touch volume in that offense right now, even against a bad defense. But I don't hate him this week because of the defensive matchup. I would hope you're not rolling him.
I guess I have kind of a hot take on this one. I think the Colts might win this game outright. I think they're going to be live to do so. When I look at this Colts team, I view them as a poor man's LA Rams with Joe Flacco as the quarterback, right? And we saw last week what a seasoned quarterback who can read the defense and properly navigate a zone blitz can do to this Vikings team. Matt Stafford picked them apart last week in defeat, right? They beat the Vikings. I think that Joe Flacco is going to have a good week here with Shane Steichen as his offensive coordinator, with the weapons that he has, with Jonathan Taylor being healthy, who, by the way, I think he might be a top 2 or 3 fantasy running back rest of year. I would almost call Flacco a tricky decision here. I think the Colts are going to be a live dog. That will be a bet this week on the gambling show for me. I like them. Then for the Vikings, man, I think that I don't know. I think that we're starting. They're still a little bit overvalued in the market, I think, but this is about as good of a matchup as it gets for a fantasy offense to go up against. In these types of matchups, I think Darnold is fine, right? I think that Darnold is very good playing with the lead and on script, and when the game kind of gets a little bit in doubt or the Vikings are trailing, that's where you kind of see bad Sam come out. I don't see that here. I think the Vikings will at least be in this game enough to be able to run their game plan. And as long as things are going according to Kevin O'Connell's schedule, right, I like him. JJ is a no-brainer. Aaron Jones still looks great, man. He's an old dude, but man, he could have a big one against this Colts team. All right, next we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going into Kansas City to play the Chiefs. And I think this is the Monday night game, right?
It is.
All right, so last one of the week, perfect. The Bucks have an implied team total of 16.5 points, and the Chiefs have an implied team total of 25 points. For the Bucks, we're starting Rachaad White and Cade Otton, and then we're tricky decisioning Baker Mayfield, Jalen McMillan, and Bucky Irving. Then for the Chiefs, we are starting Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Kareem Hunt, and DeAndre Hopkins, and we're tricky decisioning Xavier Worthy. So let's start with the Chiefs first. It's been it's been kind of ho-hum for the Chiefs so far on their way to their 8-0 start this year, or 7-0, I forgot, but they haven't lost yet. They're the last undefeated team in the league. The offense has not looked great this year, but this Buccaneers defense is really bad. They're really bad. I don't think they've held a team under 30 points in the last month. So based on that kind of projection, I think the Chiefs are going to have success here offensively. That's why Mahomes is a start. I get it's been hard, especially if you drafted him like in the fourth round, right? There were a lot of drafts where he was going as the QB1 overall. It's felt disgusting. If you've had Mahomes on a roster, I'm sure you're probably not doing great in terms of your fantasy record if you're a Mahomes roster, but starting with confidence here, this should be a good one. Same with Travis Kelsey. He had a good week last week against the Raiders. He showed up. Quite frankly, he's going to have to show up for this Chiefs team if they're going to do anything right. I think they will. It's just a matter of like how much do you save for the playoffs for him. Same with Kareem Hunt, DeAndre Hopkins, just key pieces of the offense, right? In a plus defensive matchup. Xavier Worthy just doesn't get the volume to be a start, so that's why we have him as a tricky decision. But when you're as fast as he is and explosive as he is, and in the Chiefs' offense, he's always liable to pop a long touchdown. It's just kind of hard to project. For the Bucks, we're starting Cade Otton. He absolutely destroyed me last week in one league. It looks like without the two big wide receivers here, he's going to just be a target monster. Attached to Baker, who's playing some pretty good football. Obviously, the Chiefs are a very good defense. I think they're more of a defensive football team at this point in time. But doesn't matter. That's how much we like Cade Otton. Rashad White, this Bucks backfield is interesting. At least what Todd Bowles has said is they want to ride the hot hand in the backfield. We think White should be the first running back that's out there, right? Do we like him as much as Bucky or Sean Tucker even? I definitely like Bucky better. I think Sean Tucker's whatever, right? Like, but I think the Buccaneers are probably going to be trailing in this game. Rashad White should get the dump offs from Baker. Rashad White, terrible runner of the football, very good pass catcher of the football. If he's catching passes, he should be startable in this one. Then Baker is a tricky decision. I get he's been really good for you this year. He's in the top five fantasy quarterbacks. It's just you got to realize this Chiefs defense is a monster, man. They are so good. They're so good. They're going to make him make mistakes. They're going to play man coverage against these wide receivers that are not Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I'm actually really bummed we got robbed of seeing Chris Godwin and Mike Evans against this Chiefs man-to-man scheme. I think the Bucks would have been live here to potentially upset them, but without those guys, I don't think so. Jalen McMillan, same idea, right? Like he's been thrust into a starting role on this team. It's just a matter of whether or not you think he'll be good enough to beat man coverage and get home in fantasy. I don't hate him as a pick in this one just because Baker's playing so well, but I have him as like a low end flex tentatively for this week. And then Bucky, I think the Chiefs have been really effective at stopping the run this year. I think Bucky is the better he's the best pure runner out of this collection of running backs in the backfield. But I just don't think the Bucks are gonna have time to establish it in this one. I think they might find themselves down early, be chasing a lead. Baker's gonna have to try and compensate and make up a lot of points. I would not be shocked to see a couple Baker interceptions here, which listen, if you're a 9 point dog like the Bucks are this week, I think that's fine to try and push the ball, get some points. But I don't love Bucky or his standalone value this week with the murky backfield situation. Thoughts on this one?
Yeah, the only thing is about Baker, he's only been the QB7 or worse this year in one game. So he's actually been like a remarkably stable starting asset. And I actually don't hate him in other matchups, but without his two weapons going against this defense, I really think you want to look elsewhere this week.
Yeah. And that's going to do it for us. If you made it through the whole video, thank you. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell. It really helps the channel out. Question of the week this week. Let's see. What is going to be the Chiefs' record at the end of the season? Right now, they're 7 or 8. No, I think they're probably like a 4-loss football team. Would be my guess. Where those losses come, I don't know. But I don't think they're running the table. They're not the '07 Patriots to me. And we will catch you on Friday for the gambling show.
Thank you.